Over here, I'll bring it back.
Those things to hand out.
Yeah, we've got 10 copies. I think that I've got a couple more black and white to run out. I made copies for
Projectors and screens in here.
I didn't think about that. That's okay, this will be fine. It's just a couple slides on that first.
Swing back on the other side. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's about 5 after. I was expecting a little larger crowd, but we've got 4 here, and that's a quorum, so I'm going to go ahead and call the Governmental Affairs Committee to order. And we only have one bill on the 10 o'clock meeting today. It is House Bill 790 by Representative Geisinger. And Representative, I'm going to allow you to present the bill, and then we will allow certainly public comment on the legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, House Bill 790, which was introduced last year, is the culmination of a lot of time and study by a lot of people, a lot of organizations. And not to overlook the fact that one of those organizations, which is the Commission for Election Reform, which was the Carter-Baker Commission, has suggested, as you will see our suggestion here, that in elections, when you have electronic machines, such as we do in Georgia, that you have a paper trail. And this bill has been called the Paper Trail Bill simply for that reason. In Georgia today, we have no verifiable way to have in your ballot a paper trail. When you vote, the electronic machine may or may not record your vote properly. Poll workers cannot verify whether or not the voting machine is counting the votes correctly. Errors and fraud are virtually undetectable throughout our state because we're using the same piece of equipment statewide. Recounts have been replaced with paper printouts of whatever the machine says the vote is. Now, we know with electronics today that you can take and make a computer do almost anything you want to. And basically, these voting machines are computers. So the bill suggests a paper trail. And the paper trail has to be added to the equipment that we have. We have spent about $58 million on the equipment that we're using today. And we feel that there is a necessity for us to have some sort of record in case of close elections or recounts that are necessary. I have here today some people that have worked with me over the years who are extremely aware of the problem, the effect, and a very reasonable method of correction. And I would like at this time, if you will, Mr. Chairman, to allow Mr. Garland Favorita to come forward and testify to the committee.
That's fine. Garland?
Check it. Here.
First of all, I want to thank the chair for allocating a significant amount of time to this issue and allow us to get all the information available and make it available to the committee members. And also, I'm sure that we now have adequate time to address the concerns. I'm sure the Secretary of State's office has concerns about the bill, and we hope to be able to address those concerns today. As Representative Geisinger has pointed out, we have been rated last in the nation in voting systems implementation since the electronic voting was implemented in 2002. And primarily, as Representative Geisinger has already stated, the main reason is because the voters can't verify their votes, the poll workers can't verify the counts. Recounts are now basically reprints of on previously unverifiable results, and errors and fraud are virtually undetectable statewide. prior to the implementation of electronic voting, we cast our votes, approximately 83% of them, on optical scan or punch card ballots which were auditable. Once electronic voting came into play, without the proper procedures that Representative Geisinger is proposing here, that auditable percentage went from 83% to 0. And Representative Geisinger's bill will take that back from 0 to 100%. It's a very simple, very creative solution that the committee secretary has come up with on this, and that's basically the precincts will be able to manually count a race on election night. They'll make a random drawing, post any discrepancies at the precinct. That will be carried up the line to the election results at the county websites. And if discrepancies span precincts, and there's a provision for a recount petitioning to the Secretary of State's office. So we think that's a very, very intelligent way to make this work. On an average, each race would probably be audited twice in each county, so that we could have assurance that the machines are counting the vote correctly. The audit is random. It is in public, so there can be no tampering, and everything is just in completely full public view, and it's immediate prior to the results being posted at the precinct. So we think that's the best way to conduct an audit. The question I think that you would probably be asking is, why do we need to do this? What's wrong with our current machines? Our vendor, the machine series that we use, and the software, that major release of software that we use, have been the subject of scathing reviews by both academic institutions and official government studies nationwide. And I don't really want to go into a lot of detail, but just let me give you 3 or 4 examples. Stanford, MIT, and Johns Hopkins have all criticized the various fallacies in the Diebold equipment. And Johns Hopkins found in this series of machines gross design and programming errors, according to their study. In California, the Secretary of State's office banned AccuVote TSX that uses the same software that we used in Georgia. A voting panel unanimously recommended Diebold be decertified. They recommend that 8-0. There's still a lot of politics going on out there in terms of getting them reinstated, but basically the net result was that California sued the vendor and received a $2.5 million out-of-court settlement over these issues. In Maryland, a governor's study found 26 critical security flaws out of 328 for the same machine series. A governor assembly study, a separate study that was conducted, stated that those could cause a severe disruption in an election. Those security flaws could. And recently, Governor Elrick wrote to the Board of Elections that he no longer had confidence in their ability to conduct fair and accurate elections in 2006. In Ohio, we had a similar situation where the machines were found to have the highest number of security risks of any evaluated, and deployment was halted there. And probably in Nevada, the Electronic Systems Division chief probably summed it up best when he reported to the Secretary of State in an official study that these machines were a legitimate threat to the integrity of the election process. So that's why we need to do something, and we're not advocating that the machines have to be thrown out. They just simply have to have the standard audit trail procedures that any business would have in the United States of America. That's all we're proposing here, and we think that Representative Geisinger has a very creative, practical solution to achieve this. Let me just explain a little bit about what can happen. I've been in the computer business for 35 years, and there are all sorts of ways that these machines can accidentally or intentionally be programmed to produce erroneous results. For example, probably the most important one I could tell you about is that the printed ballot may not match what is in the database. So we need to be sure whatever is printed on a machine can be match to the database records, and that's why we need to verify that. The screen can be interpreted incorrectly as well and not match to the database. Candidate totals could be swapped accidentally. Counts could be transferred incorrectly throughout the process, either at the precinct or to the counties, and there could be total errors as well. So those are some of the things that could happen, but probably even more important is that you can't rely on certification to solve this problem. There are all sorts of ways to get around certification. For example, with uncertified software patches that occur, and sometimes that's a legitimate necessity to be able to patch the machine. That's happened here in Georgia, and it might have been a very good reason for that to happen. But there are uncertified patches that get on the machines, and they could not possibly be working correctly. The other thing that is unique with these machines is that they, well, I wouldn't say it's unique, but one of the issues that of concern on these studies is that the machines use what we call interpretive code versus compiled code. What that means to the layman, think of it as food, and you have canned food or you have food on a plate. When you compile a program, you essentially put it in a can or a jar. You have to have a can opener to get it out. It's a little bit more secure if we run from compiled code versus interpretive, but that's a decision that the vendor made, and again, we can still verify this code and run it as it is. As long as it's verified, it just means that it's easier to hack. There's all sorts of ways that you can programmatically avoid certification, getting caught in certification. You can program the machine to count differently during a certain date range. You can program it to count differently after a certain number of ballots are processed. You can program it to count differently after receiving an abnormal combination of votes on a ballot, which is something I might be casting. So, or you can even program it to count differently or change results after receiving a modem signal. So the bottom line of all this, if I could sum it up just in one sentence, is that we believe that one programmer with ballot access can control the outcome of any election in Georgia. And the only way to eliminate these risks is just simply to verify the counts on election night. And HB 790 does that in a very practical way by letting each precinct count one race. And then those results, we can have assurance that each race is probably going to be counted on an average of twice in every county. So just to conclude, and I thank you for your time, but we'd like to also just point out to the committee there are two U.S. Supreme Court decisions that we feel represent our concerns. And this one was Reynolds versus Sims in 1964, where they stated it has been repeatedly recognized that all qualified voters have a constitutionally protected right to vote and to have their votes counted. The second decision we think is applicable is United States versus Mosley, where they said that the right to have one's votes counted is as open to protection as the right to put a ballot in a ballot box. And that's what we're asking the legislature to do, is to protect our right to have our vote counted. And so our request is that whatever bill passes the legislature, almost everyone down here wants to do something about this issue, and regardless of what they believe, it's almost unanimous. We're asking that whatever bill passes has vote count protection procedures or vote count verification as Representative Geisinger has laid out. There will be another bill that's coming before this committee. It passed yesterday, SB 500, that has no vote count verification procedures in it and no audit trails. The audit trails were stripped out at the Senate SLOGO committee hearing about a week or two ago based on the author's request. So I want to point out a concern that if you pass that bill as is, without this content being attached, that, in my opinion, will bring ridicule to the legislatures because we're offering the public a false solution. All of us who are in the voting activist community, all the organizations that are behind this 790, all know that that bill is not going to solve anything. It only conducts a pilot and then it repeals itself, and the pilot doesn't really mean anything because the same problems that apply to certification that I just described will apply to that pilot test. You can make it count correctly for a given test any day of the week. What you can't make it do is you can't make it count correctly if the votes are being verified on election night. That is the significance of this bill. I want to thank Representative Geisinger for a very creative solution. I also want to thank Representative Drenert for making this a bipartisan effort. And just to leave you with the thought that HB 790 will take Georgia from worst to first nationally and make us a role model for how to do electronic voting correctly. No other state that I know of has as strong a bill to make sure our votes are being counted. So if we pass this bill this session, it will be a truly historic event for Georgia. And I really thank you for the time to be able to explain a little bit about this.
Any questions of the committee?
You referenced several studies, MIT, that sort of thing, but you did not bring us any documentation.
We would be glad to supply any studies you like to the committee, and we can do that very quickly.
Anything like that that we need to use as empirical data or whatever, we really need to see that.
That's
And I'm not familiar with this group that you have referenced as saying that we have the worst voting systems, because on the other hand, I am familiar that we have been recognized nationally for being a leader in being progressive in voting. Now, that's not to say that there's not room for improvement, because on the front end, the paper trail really was not a practical thing to do. But as the process has moved forward, it's my understanding at this point now that we can implement the paper trail. So I'd like for you to explain to us, who is this group that has rated Georgia as the worst voter? This is your organization, is that correct?
No, this is Free Congress Foundation is a national organization that is based out of Washington, D.C., that I think the president is Paul Weyrich, and they're quite critical of virtually everyone, Democrats, Republicans, and in general the legislative process. So, and their study was conducted in conjunction with Verified Voting, which is also a nonpartisan organization that has supported this bill. To get to your point, we were recognized for the fact that the electronic voting machines reduce residual votes. That, we believe, is true. However, that was falsely portrayed as being, when the Cal-MIT study, as I believe you're referring to, that was falsely portrayed as the machines were accurate. The Cal-MIT study did not verify the accuracy of the machines, despite what you may have been led to believe. It verified the fact that they reduced residual votes, and I can provide you that study with a rebuttal to the comments that you have probably heard about that making us a leader in accuracy. Those were false.
Well, there's no other function in our democracy any more sacred than the elections process.
Yes, ma'am.
And so we do want to see all the information that is out there. I've never heard of the organization that you've referenced. I would appreciate having that information. I would appreciate having copies of any information that you have.
I would be glad to do that. And let me just say one thing. Regardless of whether we were rated last or not, the reason that we were rated last are the reasons that we have stated here. No Georgia voter can verify whether or not their ballot was recorded correctly. No poll worker can verify whether or not the machines are counting correctly. Errors and fraud are virtually undetectable statewide, and recounts have been replaced with reprints of previously unverifiable results. So regardless of who said what, and I'll be glad to give you that information and will, that's the status of Georgia. We are at 0% auditability, and we were at 83%. So that's why we need to do something. But I will gladly give you those studies, Representative Buck.
Any other questions of the committee members? Representative Jennings.
I don't know if you're the one who's going to answer this or if Representative Geisinger is going to do it, but I'm interested in the aspects of the bill and the procedures, which I have some questions about.
Either one, that's fine. Either one.
You want me to start going through it? I haven't heard the bill presented. I've heard why we should have legislation, but I haven't heard this technique described. And when I read through it, I've had some questions. Would you like me to ask those questions now?
Why don't we do this? If it's okay with you, Representative Jennings, we'll finish with Mr. Favorito, and then allow Representative Gassinger to go through the bill section by section, if that's good with you. Any further questions? I have a couple of questions before you step down.
Okay.
You mentioned in there, and I just picked up on a statement, poll workers have no way of verifying if the ballots are being counted correctly. My understanding is poll workers shouldn't be checking the counts of ballots as they're being cast. And to an extent, we don't want the poll workers able to check the ballot counts as they're coming.
That's a very good point. But the problem that you have there is that we can't be in a position of letting some central authority tell the precincts what their vote counts are. The precincts have to be able to know that the results that they are reporting are correct. And that is a trait that you've got to have in any election, not just in the state of Georgia, not just in any other state in the United States of America, but anywhere in any country in the world. The precincts have to be able to verify that their counts are correct and report those up and verify that they have been reported up correctly. Otherwise, the system is subject to uncontrollable possibility of errors and fraud that you just have no way of detecting.
But that should only come at the end of the day. If I understand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Yes. I'm sorry. Absolutely. That would only come at the end of the day once the polls close. I apologize. And you would have a random selection of a race out of a hat in full public view. They would then count that one race and verify that race against the machine totals. And if that race is correct, that's fine, they're done. If there's a discrepancy, they would post that on with the precinct results. It would be included as if part of the official election results, and that would go upstream to the county where they could report it on the website, and any candidate can see that.
I have one other question for you. Obviously, there's a significant cost financially in putting the system in place. Which is, our duty is to protect two things, access and integrity. With that said, how much additional time do you think it's going to take an individual to vote because of the time that it takes to print the ballot, then their review of the ballot, and then them actually casting yes or no? And then the second question to follow up through with that is, according to your literature, printed ballot for voter may not match what is recorded in the database. If that is the case, if the printed ballot might not match what is recorded, how does spending, just questions I'm looking for answers.
No, those are excellent questions. Excellent questions. Let me address the time to vote first, and then the spending issue. The time to vote. It shouldn't really make any difference because basically currently the voter verifies the summary screen now. Instead of they could actually verify the ballot, the paper ballot, depending upon how it's implemented, they could just verify the paper ballot in lieu of the summary screen. However, depending upon how it's implemented, there could be a two-step process where you could verify the summary screen and the ballot. It just depends on how we choose to implement the audit trail. I don't think it would add that much time myself, personally, Mr. Chairman. And in regards to the spending issue, that's a very good subject to bring up. We have probably about 100 years of computer expertise just amongst 5 or 6 of us that are doing this, and we believe that these machines, first of all, the machines already have printers on them, and we believe that a software routine could be written to print these ballots out, and we would be willing to write that or find somebody to write it for us and give that to the state so that we can keep the cost at a minimum to produce the appropriate audit trail. I've heard all sorts of varying estimates on what it would cost to do this and what would have to be done. It seems like it changes on a yearly basis and gets higher and higher. But we'll let the Secretary of State's office explain their position on that, and that's what we think can be done. And if we can't do that, if they're saying in Kennesaw saying that we can't do that, then I would like to point out to the committee that the election board is just voted for $16 million worth of electronic poll books last month, and they're voting again, I think, in 2 days for another $15 million to spend in equipment. None of this money is being spent on making sure that our votes are verifiable and are being counted correctly. So that's another aspect to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do you want to carry us through various sections of the bill?
Yes, sir, I can. Mr. Chairman, as you can see, the legislation itself is laid out so that we can go from just an electronic vote to a paper ballot that is printed out along with the equipment. We're working with the subcommittee substitute of 790.
It's LC 282589S.
Yes. What it does is very simply clarifies how the paper ballot would work, how the count would take place, the random sample method, which is the selection is made at the time of the close of the precinct. As you know, when a precinct closes down at the end of the day, when we were using punch cards, they would actually dump the punch cards out on a table and pile them up and count the number of cards versus the number of certificates that they had of people who had voted. All we're going to do here is take those paper ballots, and a determination will be made by a drawing as to which race they want to cover, and they will simply look at that one race and count that race manually. It'll take probably 20 or 30 minutes to do this. That race number should come out the same as the electronic number in the end. And if it doesn't, it's just reported that there is a discrepancy. It will be posted on the door, like the election returns are today, that there is a discrepancy. But it will give us an opportunity to know that the equipment was accurate, the printout based on what everybody looked at as they voted was accurate, and we will proceed from there. If there's a question, you can have a physical recount. With the Opti scanner, which worked similar to this, it only took one piece of equipment in each precinct to do basically the same thing. And we moved away from that Opti scanner because it required a paper ballot to vote on. And what the machine would do was scan the ballot. In this case, we've turned it completely around, and the equipment electronically records and then prints out what it says the machine has recorded. If they do not agree, it will show up very clearly. And everyone will feel secure that the way they voted was exactly what the printout said.
And if I understand correctly, if there is a discrepancy, the paper ballots take precedent, and they're the ones that would actually be counted.
That's correct.
I guess one further question. I'm sorry, Representative Jennings, do you have none?
I have several, so go ahead.
Okay. The one question I have is if we did find a discrepancy, would we then turn around and use the paper ballots for all of the races and the machines that were? How would we handle it if we did?
Well, it's reported as a discrepancy, and then the election supervisor will make that decision as to how he's going to handle it.
Representative Jennings.
First question is how this appears. The machine's going to print the summation of the votes where we see it now as a screen. Will it be the same way? Will it be seen through a glass or plastic windows? Is that so you can't get to it to change it, but you view it through some clear substance?
My understanding is that there are several pieces of equipment out there that do this, and that's the way to do it. In other words, you have an opportunity to read the printout, and then it will drop down into the box.
But you can't reach that.
You can't touch it. I understand.
All right. In section 3, I'm going from the bill that I looked at before, the committee substitute. So I make a mistake, but it's the last couple of lines in section 3, which is talking about underlined area. I guess that's line 18, direct recording electronic voting system. Whether related to hardware or software shall render necessary a re-examination or reapproval of such system or of its kind. The reapproval by whom? Is that something that you're talking about? Polling place or different place?
This section refers to the Secretary of State's office.
As you say earlier in that paragraph.
Yes.
All right. Moving on to section 5. Parent, be parent, all proceeds, the tabulating center, precincts are written to view the public. Silent on what observers can do. No person except one employee designated for purpose by the superintendent shall touch any ballot, any VRE, or tabulating equipment. What can an observer do? Does that mean that they could go, what could they do?
They can do the same thing they can now, and that is observe the count. They can observe the process. They cannot interfere with the process. State law today provides that you cannot interfere. And the public doesn't even understand today that they have a right to be there to witness this.
So when the polling day is completed at 7 o'clock, and that's still an hour, the public is able to stay there during the process of closing up and tabulating and seeing if there's errors in the sample and.
Well,
things like that.
they can witness the count, they can witness what takes place as they can today. Most polls do not allow people in simply because they've locked the door and their attitude is we're closed for business, so we're not going to unlock the door. But if the public wants to come in and observe the wrap-up, they're allowed to do that. They cannot interfere in any way, though.
Glad you mentioned that, because when I was a poll worker, assistant poll manager, I know we locked the door after the last voter left.
Sure.
So that we could tabulate the cards that you described. And we didn't allow any poll workers. You were saying they were allowed to all the time, that was just wrong.
That's correct.
Activity.
That's correct.
And they'll still be allowed.
That's correct.
Sounds like something to be worthwhile.
Now, usually in a polling place where that occurs, the poll manager that understands this will ask them to go sit somewhere where they can observe, but stay out of their. In other words, they're not allowed to handle anything, but they can observe.
Well, I know in Irish we didn't allow anybody in.
Understand?
I think that'd be something the Secretary of State's office might put in the training. Then, item C, manager shall obtain at least 3 results tapes from each DRE unit to verify the number of ballots cast as recorded on the tapes matches the public count number as displayed on the DRE unit.
I think you'll find that's the law today. Because one of those, and it's called a tape, but I would call it a printout. One of those printouts is posted on the door of the polling place. And the other 2 are put in the box and sealed up.
Page 4, under parent F, parent 1, parent. The slips of paper, line 20. The slips of paper shall be available for examination by any member of the public who desires to do so. How are they going to be handled? Is that, are they going to be saved afterwards, or are they going to be available right then and then discarded at some time?
We, as we did with the paper ballots, put them into storage for a period of time, and I've forgotten what it is, but I think it's a year or maybe 2 years.
So that is understood standard procedure and need to be in legislation.
It's my understanding.
The Secretary of State's office will confirm that when they come up. And on page 5, line 12, what are 0 tapes?
I honestly don't know.
What's that?
You know, I think we have.
We can address that. 0 tapes are part of the current process. Basically, they're tapes that are printed out on the printer that isn't part of every one of these systems that we have now. They produce a 0 total, supposedly, that is supposed to verify that the machines are empty when we at the start of the polling day. But they actually may not verify everything. An original looks at the code, basically the line of code that told it to, did the zero total, basically told it to print zeros and nothing else.
The last one is yes, on the last page, page 8, item 6. For any other cause which shows that another was a person legally nominated, elected, well, beaten off primary for election. That didn't make sense to me. I just didn't understand what the another was the person legally nominated. There's some word stuff out there or something.
Which line are you reading?
Line
5 and
6.
Oh.
That's current language. That's not being changed.
This reads, the result of a primary or election may be contested on one or more of the following grounds. 6, for any other cause which shows that another is the person legally nominated elected.
Well, since that's current, we'll let the Secretary of State explain what that means.
Go ahead, Adam.
Kathy, I'm going to let you come forward and testify. We're down to about 15 minutes, a little less than 15 minutes, and there is a committee that follows us.
I understand. I'm not gonna, I'd like to just pass something. You can pass it down and look at it. Since we're talking about a paper roll, I want you to see this picture. This is a paper roll from one voting machine stretched across the warehouse in Nevada from the November 2004 election. So while you're looking at that, you can sort of keep in mind what that piece of paper would look like when you rolled it out to actually count it. I'm not going to take up your time this morning in trying to rebut Mr. Favorito's conspiracy theories. Instead, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the logistics of House Bill 790. First off, in Section 1, it requires that the paper record be the official record of the election. Right here are the new voluntary voting system guidelines that are talked about later in the bill that say they don't currently exist. They do exist. These were adopted by the Election Assistance Commission in December of 2005. There's 24 months to implement this particular standards. As you can see, they're very lengthy. These will be effective, and Georgia must adhere to them by December of 2007. This document says if you make that paper the official record of the ballot, you must provide the same accessibility for a disabled voter to verify the paper as you would any other voter. So that's another piece of technology that would have to be developed, because the disabled voter would in some manner have to get the paper out from under the glass, possibly feed it into another unit and have those choices that they selected read back to them. Now, if your state elects not to make the paper official, then you're not required to do that. But if you make it official, the disabled voter has to have the same exact access. It talks about the official record for any recount. Georgia is so very unique in our runoff system of elections. Most states don't have runoffs 3 and 4 weeks after an election. Currently, we work, and the counties work, very hard in 7 days' time to certify the results of the election so that we can produce a ballot for absentee voting for our electors in time to vote for that runoff election. It's a tight time frame of working sometimes around the clock. I would like to read to you the results in Nevada, who used a voter verifiable paper audit trail in November of 2004, and they did count the paper after the fact, not at the polls, but after the fact. One roll of tape, and you can see this in the picture. with 64 ballots, that's just 64 people who voted on that one piece of paper, created a continuous roll of 318 feet in length. It took a 4-person team 4 hours to complete the auditing of that single tape that you saw, which equates to 4 minutes per ballot. And I don't think 4 minutes per ballot is an overinflated number. That's 4 minutes if you were counting an optical scan ballot or a punch card ballot is not an overinflated number. If you multiply that number times an average of 1,000 voters in a polling place, which is average for a general election, then it would take 66 hours to count the paper for one polling place. Even if the poll workers counted at a very speedy 2 minutes per ballot, the average time to count the races would be 33 hours. So I want you to keep that in mind looking at that piece of paper as you consider this piece of legislation. In addition, it also talks about the poll worker removing the paper from the canister and counting this paper. The paper's locked into a canister, and Mr. Chairman, you touched on that a moment ago, in that while we do owe the voters the right to ensure that their vote is accurate and counted accurately, I'm not sure that we owe the poll worker the ability to take all of these ballots out of a locked, secure canister and begin to stretch them out and start trying to hand count those at the polling place. If you've worked at a polling place, you know that can create chaos. And yes, it is an open public process, and we train on that continually, that you should leave the doors open. Those who don't have been cited before the State Election Board in the past. I tried to imagine a polling place at the close of the polls at 7 o'clock that a poll manager would get a uniform piece of paper and record each race down on it, and then cut the slips of paper, put them into an envelope, and draw one race out of that. They would then proceed to a machine, take this canister off, and start unrolling paper. You would have to have a second team of poll workers who arrived to assist with the counting process at the close of the polls if you were going to do this at the precinct. Section 6 really gets to the heart of it when it says that until the Election Assistance Commission, pursuant to the Help America Vote Act, adopts standards, the Secretary of State's office is not required to meet the standards. The standards have been adopted. I know, Representative, that this bill was drafted last year, and at that time there were no standards. I served on the committee with the Election Assistance Committee who reviews these standards. They're quite lengthy, and they're very good, and they will address how voter verifiable paper audit trails should function. I would urge you to consider Senate Bill 500 when it comes before you. It did pass unanimously yesterday in the Senate. The Secretary of State's office has worked with Senator Stevens on this legislation. It provides for a pilot in each of 3 counties, 1 precinct each, in November. This pilot will give us the opportunity to know exactly how the General Assembly wishes to address legislation going forward. Should voter verifiable paper audit trails be implemented in all of Georgia. We have on many occasions held pilots prior to large implementations to determine the best course of action, and I would urge you to do the same at this time. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. That's kind of the bill in a nutshell.
Representative Buckner, and if we could, we've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. I would like to let a couple of other speakers in.
Point of clarification, standards were what I was wanting to ask the Secretary of State's office about. Where did the standards actually evolve from? Are these federal standards that have then come down to the state level?
Yes, ma'am. The Election Assistance Commission called for the National Institute of Standards and Testing to work with a special committee designed by the Help America Vote Act to develop new voting system standards. We currently have voting system standards that were developed by the National Association of State Election Directors, and the Help America Vote Act wanted to take it to a higher level. Basically, you'd had a lot of people do it on a volunteer basis for many, many years. So this document has been created by a number of scientists, election officials, special interest groups have weighed in on it. There have been numerous meetings and feedback and workshops across the country for the last 2 years on this particular document. And as I said, it's pretty much what's considered the gold standard now for voting system guidelines.
Thank you. Gary Smith.
Okay. I know you guys are in a hurry, and I'll try to be brief. My name is Gary Smith. I'm the Director of Elections for Forsyth County, Georgia. I've been in that position now for 4 years. Prior to that, I sat on the Board of Elections, and I am also the legislative co-chair for the Georgia Election Officials Association for the about 500 elected officials, election officials in our state. I'm speaking today because the concern that we have with regards to this bill and the impact that it can have on our ability to be able to hold elections and hold them in a way which meets the needs of our public, our voters, and allows us to be able to continue to have what we think is a very good operation we've got. If I thought for 1 minute, and I would have been speaking here, by the way, with the chairman of our Board of Commissioners, because I've talked to him, I've talked to each of our members of our commissioners, and also to our Board of Elections, and we stand united, against this particular bill in the form that it's in. In addition to that, we have held some 8 elections in our county, which have cast about 250,000 ballots in that period of time. And what we do after each election, or during each election, when people are casting ballots, we ask them what they think. Are you satisfied with the process? Do you like what we've got? Would you like to be able to change it? Do you want to add a paper trail to it or something like that? And I have here just today, I've brought along, I have hundreds of responses. I have hundreds of emails and that sort of thing that have come from the citizens of Forsyth County anyway, not Fulton County and some of the other counties that you guys represent. But there's not one person in here out of those 250,000 that have voted are asking for the type of thing that you're looking for. There may be a couple of people that would have said something about it, but nobody has responded to us. And I can tell you, if I had received those kind of requests, I would be the first person here requesting we do something. So I'm asking, that you put common sense with this as well. I am very concerned about we have anything that has anything to say anything about our ability to hold elections in a proper way and have every ballot count correctly. But I don't think this is the process to take. I'd be glad to talk to you at some other time about it. We have a lot of things that we've written, and there's a lot of other stuff that people think we're sure to say. So thank you for allowing me to talk. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
We're going to have time for other testimony when SB 500 gets here. Aaron Bruschetta, I want to try to give the gentleman time to speak as well.
I want to thank the members of the committee for taking this critical opportunity to consider the deep and patriotic concerns of Georgia voters regarding the potential for large-scale election fraud that currently threatens the very core of our constitutional democracy. I'm going to stop my formal notes there, outside of saying that as a lifelong advocate for and student of computer and information technologies, I am specifically here to echo the nearly unanimous voices of computer professionals the world over in unequivocally stating that paperless, computerized, invisible ballot voting systems are entirely unsuited to use in any kind of legitimate election process. Without the tangible evidence of paper ballot documents that have been physically verified by the voters who cast them, these systems are an open invitation to election fraud and corruption on a massive and previously impossible scale because of the single point of entry that can happen with computer programming and with manipulations to the code. Where I can't even begin to start to address the fallacies that have been put forth from the Secretary of State's office in the 2 years that I've been on this issue. just that knowing the essential necessity of maintaining voter anonymity in the election process, the use of inherently unaudible black boxes and secret proprietary corporate software for collecting and tabulating our votes is an entirely insane proposition at the outset. It has led to all kinds of conflicts of interest in the voting process by privatizing our vote. And basically that's what's happened. By replacing all physical evidence throughout Georgia and our election processes with intangible electro-chads, and by expanding that open invitation to vote fraud by delegating total control, and this control is total control of the invisible Chad counting to the proprietary conflicting interests of the Diebold Corporation and their associated secretive certification processes. You have to understand that NACED was primarily funded by the voting machine companies. All the standards that these machines were purchased under were written, by people who were directly involved and had potential gain from seeing the implementation of these systems. Not the least of which is Britton Williams, who heads up the taxpayer-funded Diebold public relations platform known as the Election Center up in Kennesaw. It's little wonder to me in addressing this that the voters seem comfortable with the machines. Okay? Basically, the voters have been intentionally misinformed, in part through that public relations platform in Kennesaw, in large part through that. But our polls, when we provide the voter with a choice between having invisible electrochads counted by the secret software of private corporations or paper ballots counted in full public view, the choice is overwhelmingly, nearly 90% of the thousands that we have polled, and I can produce the documents for that, of the thousands that we have polled, that they want a paper ballot. And as silly as the wording may sound, invisible electrochads counted by the secret software of proprietary corporations, that is exactly the kind of system we are stuck with here in Georgia and have been since 2002, when the entire citizenry of the state was disenfranchised.
Let me, if I may, there's another committee that's scheduled.
Yes, sir, I understand.
We have certainly televising the committee meetings is good for the general public and helps people across the state.
Yes, sir.
See what's going on. One of the downsides to it that we haven't worked through yet is that we have to stick to our
time limits. Yes, sir, I understand that. Well, in closing, let me just quickly thank you for considering HB 790. I think this is the kind of legislation that we need to restore legitimate elections to Georgia and to re-enfranchise the citizens of this state. It's truly an intolerable situation that the Diebold Corporation controls the entire counting of our votes, because in the end, those who cast the ballots decide nothing, while those who count the ballots decide everything. And right now, the Diebold Corporation decides who sits in the seats of this legislature, and I don't think that that's right.
Thank you, and I want to apologize to John Fortain, who did not get to speak. I will try to move you to the front of the list as we have further discussions on this code section. I'm going to suggest that we leave House Bill 790 in the status that it's in right now, which is simply in the committee, and that we take no action today. If that's okay with the members of the committee, we certainly will have other opportunities to discuss it over the next few days. And we have Senate Bill 500 coming to this committee, as most of you know, which is a smaller version of 790, and we will have plenty of opportunity to discuss this particular issue as we go forward.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just want to point out there is a problem. You know there's a problem, and the problem is not going to go away. We need to find a solution to this problem. And that's why the legislation is sitting here today. We will pursue it. This session or next session.
Thank you. We're adjourned.